Hi, I want to speak to you about human rights in Canada, particularly with regards to families and parents, and in particular the situation with respect to fathers. I was a stay-at-home parent with my daughter for 4 years, and then for reasons between her mother and I, we broke up. Regardless of the reasons, which really doesn't have much to do with it, but I will say that there was no form of violence or abuse or mistreatment. And in cases where there is such a circumstance, then obviously these are criminal matters. But they're not dealt with as though they are criminal matters. Instead, accusations fly in family courts, which are false and misleading. This is a very common circumstance, and I'm sure you'll notice that in YouTube it doesn't take much of a search to find that there is an ongoing circumstance of violating men's rights when it comes to custody and access regarding their children. That was the same situation with me. In fact, I didn't believe that I needed to defend myself in terms of any kind of accusations because there were none to be made. When it comes to situations of any type of abuse, these matters are dealt with by the criminal courts, and there is a system in place to deal with that. There are very stringent laws in terms of spousal abuse that take care of those matters. What I'm talking about are not those cases. I'm talking about a case such as mine, where you have a good, responsible, caring father who participates in the raising of the child and who is not respected when the relationship breaks down in terms of his rights in dealing with the circumstance that has evolved. Fundamentally, what we're dealing with here, other than getting into the issues, which is what is often used in family court to sidetrack the reality of the circumstance, which is more often than not, if it's gone to court, it is a situation of acrimony, of one person against the other in terms of the parents, and it becomes a surrogate divorce situation when in fact the issue being dealt with is child custody. And I'm going to isolate it and talk about child custody and access as part of this, because that's really the issue that we're dealing with. I've looked at this from many different angles, and in my case I presented to the court quite simply that under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that I'm entitled to being treated equally under the law. I not only mentioned the Charter, but I mentioned all of the family law legislation and child protection legislation that essentially states that parents are equal. When I cited this in court in the judge's final decision, the judge stated that the Constitution doesn't apply in family court, and also, to add insult to injury, even refused to comment on the basis of that decision. It was simply an out-of-hand commentary in the judge's statement that the Constitution does not apply in family court. So here we have a country where the fundamental law and all of the family legislation which mandates equality of parents is not being respected by the courts. Now the reason for this is very simple and clear to see. When you see the circumstance of what happens with families, you find that there's a dispute between a husband and a wife, and all of the property that they own goes up in smoke. Essentially it's sold off and turned into liquid cash, that is. This liquid cash is then confiscated by the lawyers in the multi-billion-dollar legal industry. Of course, they always pretend to take your side, and you can be assured that they certainly are on your side in trying to get as much money as they can from you to them. Essentially, that's what it comes down to. It is an ongoing multi-billion-dollar industry based on theft, based on fraud. And essentially what they want to do is present as much as they can in terms of allegations and acrimony to incite the situation. The mother then gains custody, as in my case, where, you know what the judge ruled? There was nothing to be said against me. The judge essentially ruled that the reason that I did not get equal custody, even though the Constitution and the laws of the country assure us of equality, I did not get custody because I did not agree with the mother. And we didn't get along, so they said. Now the thing is, it's not a question of whether you get along. It's a question of what are the rights of the child. Doesn't the child have a right to access to both parents even though they don't get along? The other thing was, there was never an issue with her mother and I getting along. As a matter of fact, we cooperated in taking her to school in the mornings when the relationship originally ended, and in terms of her care as well. The situation became inflamed when she got a lawyer, who then advised her to move, and then advised her to deny me access, and then advised her to come after me for ridiculous amounts of child support. This situation wrangled through the courts for 2 years. It started off with a judge essentially telling me that I'm going to pay child support without even hearing the facts as to whether or not joint custody was justified. And why did he not want to deal with joint custody and the issue of support became first? Because by doing it in that way, custody would become de facto. Because then they could allow this thing to simmer long enough and hope that through frustration that I make some kind of foolish move out of anger or hostility because of the frustration created by the system itself. Essentially, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. The bottom line is, the reason that this goes on, this inequality persists, is because this multi-billion-dollar industry is going to impoverish you. If you are a man and you are involved in an acrimonious separation circumstance, then you will be taken to the cleaners. All of your assets will be sold, and all of the money will end up in the lawyer's hands one way or another through billable hours. That's essentially what it's all about. It's a complete fraud. It's a complete industry. It's involving politicians who are former lawyers. It is involving judges who are former lawyers and appointed. These people are not elected. They don't represent you or I. They represent political contributions, shall we say, that they've made in the past, and as their reward they become judges. Essentially, the system is completely corrupt. It is much like the financial services sector and the kind of scams that we've seen by the administrators of finance, the collapse of the banking industry, and it's the same thing that's going on in the family law system. What I would advise most fathers is don't get angry with your ex. And in fact, in court, I wasn't particularly angry with her. I was angry with a system that gave her a gun, that enabled and encouraged her to do this sort of thing out of her own self-interest, if you will, or desire to demonstrate raw power. This is essentially what it was a power struggle. The lawyer gave her the opportunity and said, look, lady, you don't need to put up with this. You can have all the custody and you can get child support and we can take this guy to the cleaners. That's essentially the way the system operates. Sure, they may be a little less callous than what I've presented, but I don't know. I wasn't there.